So this workshop is about building Angular 1.x applications, and I will be probably using 1.3, 1.4 version because the basic features of Angular 1.x have been pretty stable for quite a while. Some people have already jumped on the bandwagon of Angular 2.0, but it is not really stable yet. I was in the Angular workshop at Google last week, and it was really confusing when one person was showing how to test Angular 2 applications, and he was constantly saying, oh, this is already deprecated, this has already changed, this has already changed, this will change next week. So Angular 2 has a lot to offer, but still it's not ready for the prime time. This is my assessment. So let's look how Angular 1 application can be developed from the get-go. I'm calling this workshop a pseudo-real Angular application because we will try to develop a very small application. But I remember years and years back when the personal computers just came around, every small business wanted an account management application. So the small business needs to know who their customers are, have a little database of the customers, and what do they charge their customers. Look at the invoices, how much is still due, and that's the simplest accounting application that was just prolific. And every single programmer or independent contractor was asked, can you develop a little accounting application for us? And then big companies started doing all of this stuff, and here we are. So we'll start from the project requirements. We'll look at the HTML templates. We'll look at how we configure an application in Angular. And then we'll look at RESTful API using Restangular as a library that allows us to talk from AngularJS to the server through the RESTful API. The focus of this workshop will be on which code belongs to which file in Angular, because early enough when Angular tutorials came around, people didn't know what is the best practice, which code belongs where, because there were so many ways to do the same things over and over. So the functionality scope of my small application will be the user will have to be able to create accounts, look at the list of accounts. I don't know what happens with my slides. Okay, here we go. My keyboard is not working. So view the list of accounts, add account, edit account, remove accounts, and for each account, to view the invoices, and again, do the same things, add, edit, remove invoices for an account. Then when you start an application like this, you always start with the UI design. It's kind of a set of UI wireframes. I usually work with the UX or UI development team, and they bring you wireframes. For my application, it will be a simple app where there is a splash screen, like a home page, and there is a list of accounts. My list of accounts will have only one column with the name, no more properties at this time, and a whole bunch of buttons. So you can add a new account, you can edit the account for each row, you can remove an account or view invoices in the account. If you view an account, one individual account, through edit mode, or if you try to add a new account, we will show the account list. I'm sorry, the account form, where the user will be able to enter the name of the account. If it's edit, then the name will be pre-populated with the current account name. If it's add new, it will be an empty form. And then when you click on view invoices, we'll see the list of invoices for current account. The invoices will have like a few more columns: invoice name, invoice amount, amount due, and maybe some IDs for the account or for the invoice. And again, if we add new or edit, we'll have a form UI page or view where we can edit the fields of each invoice. Now, to support this application, we will need some kind of backend, a database. And I usually recommend my students, and let me try to show you a live version of the Sandbox API. So Sandbox, GetSandbox.com is a free service for simple projects like mine here that very easily allows you to create RESTful API in JavaScript. So you sign up for the service, they give you like a sample project. Usually it's a list of users and a way to access individual users and the lists. So here I converted this into my accounts support management system where I can get accounts through the get HTTP method. I can post to the list of accounts through the post. That will be a creation of the new account. I can get an account by ID and I can post to accounts by ID. Here I'm kind of bending the rules a little bit. Usually when you try to update an account, you use a put or patch HTTP request. For the simplicity here, I will be posting to accounts with an account ID when I want to update. And then I can also delete an account by ID and do the same for the invoices. Posts to accounts, account ID invoices will be create a new invoice for an account. Get will be get the list of invoices. Get account with account ID and invoice with invoice ID is just getting one invoice at a time. Delete one invoice at a time and update one invoice at a time. Why I really like this service, GetSandbox.com, is that, first of all, for the simple projects, it's free. Secondly, you really can see the code and develop this code in JavaScript. If it loads fast enough, we can see the code. So, for example, I can start looking at the code. What happens if I try to get an account list? Here it is. This is the implementation of the account list. Let's see one little thing. I'm afraid kernel task is using a lot of my computer CPU. Okay. So to implement the get method on the accounts list, I return response with the state.accounts. And the state.accounts will be either accumulated list of accounts or an empty array. So state here is the object, which is like a blob of data in the GetSandbox.com server memory in my application. So I will implement all the data there through this simple JavaScript, assuming that my state variable is like a storage. And state.accounts will be like a table of accounts, and state.accounts.invoices will be like a JavaScript JSON object of the invoices. So you can do it too if you're a JavaScript developer, and it should be very convenient to create simple RESTful API server-side support. Now let's go back to what we're going to do today. The next thing, I believe, we will look at the templates and see how this whole application is developed. I will be using a plunker to demonstrate all the code. I'm putting the link of this plunker into this workshop message box so that you can get it. And it is displayed right here. You can access this plunker and fork it and then play with it at your own time, and we'll probably have to implement some features that I have not finished yet. So what do we have? Whenever we look at the web application, not the object-oriented way, but HTML-driven applications, and Angular 1.x is pretty much HTML-driven web application. We start with HTML file. So index.html in my case is the file where everything starts. What do I have here? I have a couple of style sheets added. One is a bootstrap. I use bootstrap just to make sure that I have standard buttons and I have standard navigation bar, which is, by the way, responsive, I hope. So if I reopen this page here, you can see it's responsive nav bar. Then I have a few JavaScript files that I include. I do not need jQuery because Angular comes with its own version of jQuery. It's called JQLite, and it's been around forever. And I'm not using any specific versions of specific features of jQuery. You can see that Plunker restarts the application every time we make any change in the code. Then I have Angular UI router, which will help, or AngularJS itself, minimized version. Angular UI router, which will help me move from one view to another and to configure these views. And I also have Restangular here. Restangular will allow me to easier talk to my server, the sandbox that I created. And Restangular uses underscore, which is a convenient library to use in general. So these are my dependencies for files here. And then I have my own files, which start with app.js and controller and service for both my accounts and my invoices. So I have accounts control, I have account service, invoices control, and invoices service. Then the actual markup comes right here. And what is specific about Angular here is that you can see unusual, specific to Angular properties of HTML tags. So ng-app means that Angular, since Angular is already included in this HTML file, will parse the DOM, and if it finds ng-app property, it will assume that anything within this tag, having ng-app property, needs to be controlled and processed and supported by Angular. So this is the specific property ng-app. It has to be mapped through the name of ng-app to the module in my Angular application, and we'll see how it's done in a second. The next thing is I have a wrapper div with ng controller app controller. Here is this div. And again, it tells Angular that anything within this div will be supported by the app controller. Usually, app controller as a wrapper controller is used for things like which are generic for your all views. Usually, it's user privileges, user preferences, things like that, or global configuration settings that all the pages can use. In my case, I just put it here for the kind of the good practice reason, and you will see in the code that I don't do anything inside. It will be just an empty app controller, but this will be a good place for these global features. The next thing is a bootstrap nav, a navigation with 3 tabs: home, accounts, and invoices. You see them here. So this is all simple bootstrap classes. The only strange thing that you can see here is that the A-links do not have href property, but they have UI-sref. And UIRSref, again, it's the Angular so-called directive or the property that tells Angular to process it in a special way. Actually, in this case, it's not just Angular, it's Angular UI router that will recognize these UIRSref attributes or directives and process them in such a way that when we click on the first A tag, which has a label home, this label home, a UI router will redirect to a page which has the state home. If we click on the link which says accounts on this one, it will go to a page which has a combined state accounts.list. And if you click on invoices, it will go to the state invoices. So underneath, under the nav bar, I have a div container with another div, a child div, which looks like it's empty, but we have stuff here underneath, under the nav bar. And this stuff is coming from, again, this special directive recognized by the UI router, and it says UI view. So UI router will say, okay, we need to develop this view and replace or put it inside the UI view div so that the view will live within this HTML tag. So this is the HTML-driven application. And the first thing that will start working here is the JavaScript file app.js. Let's take a look what's there. My app.js, first thing first, defines an Angular module, which is called PBWS1 app. And this name, this particular string variable, string constant, has to match the name on my index.html, this one, in the ng app. This module called PBWS1 app will be my module, and this is how we define it. And then later we can attach few things to this module. So for example, here is the way we can reference this module, angular.module, without any additional parameters. If we have parameters, that means that we're defining it. If we don't have parameters, means that we are referencing it. When we define it, we also have the second parameter is the array of dependencies. And the array of dependencies allow Angular to use dependency injection. And in my case, I'm telling my module that it can use UI router and it can use Restangular. These are the two external services that will become available to all my controllers and services and all my Angular code here, including things like $state provider or $URL router provider that are part of the UI router and Restangular provider, which is part of Restangular. So what do we attach to my module? We attach a config. Config is a pure JavaScript function defined right here. And this will tell Angular to use configuration from this function. And we also attach the app controller. And Angular can use dependency injection for it, which will be called the same name, app controller. But app controller, appctrl, is again a simple function here that doesn't do anything. This is the placeholder for the global configurations of features for all my views. Now let's look at the config. What do we configure in our application? We're configuring two things. We're configuring UI router, all my views, and we're configuring Restangular. UI router configuration here is going through the list of states. So for example, here we define a state provider with a state property which has a state home. And if the user clicks on the link that directs to this state home, the URL in the browser, if we had a separate browser window, not in Plunker, here will say it will append /home to the page URL, and the view that will be placed in the placeholder that we saw here in div UI view, inside here will go an HTML code which is defined in home.html. So if I clicked on home, this is what I see, and it's coming probably from home.html. Here is my home.html, and you can see that this is exactly the HTML that we see under the nav bar here on the right. Okay, so this is how we define the views. Which views do we define? That we looked at on this slide. Okay, so we define the home view, we define the accounts list, we define the accounts edit, new, we define invoices, and invoices list, and invoices edit. How do we do it? Again, here is the state accounts. And accounts will have accounts.html template. Here is the code. If we click on accounts, we should see something similar what is defined here. Okay, here is my accounts. It didn't go there yet. Flutter sometimes is very peculiar about when it wants and does not want to work. So, oh boy. Let me make sure that I close all the extra applications because the kernel task is overwhelming here. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so if I click on accounts, here we go. It shows me the H1 accounts here, this one. And then underneath, it shows me the table. But I don't have any table in my accounts.html. Well, you can see that we have a container with a child view UI view. So anything inside this container will be using accounts controller, using account controller as syntax. So in the templates, I can use the word accounts, referring my controller, and the controller will provide all the data. But the child view needs to go inside, and the child views are the two views that we have as combined views, accounts list, or accounts new, or accounts edit. So my accounts list will go under this H1, the header level 1 tag. This table should be coming from accounts list HTML. Here is accounts list HTML, and it shows the table, regular HTML table. The header row has a name column header and a button on the right, add new account. Here is add new account. And when we click on this button, the ng click Angular directive tells Angular that we need to invoke the method add new on my accounts controller. So accounts controller should have a method add new, which will be invoked when we click on this button. Then we have multiple rows in this table. And how many rows? Angular ng repeat directive tells us to iterate accounts that live inside accounts AC property of my controller AC property. And for each of these accounts, we generate a table row. In the table row, we have the account name, double curly bracket is the two-way binding that Angular uses. So this account variable is the same as this account variable. So for each account, we take the account name and display it in the first column. And then in the second column, here is the second TD. We have 3 buttons: edit, remove, and view invoices, edit, remove, and view invoices in each row. And if we click on any of these buttons, the appropriate method, corresponding method, edit, delete, or invoices, will be invoked with an argument, current account ID. So in each row, this account ID will be different. Okay. Now, if we click on add new account, what will happen is our configuration says that accounts new should put accounts edit.html in our subview. And accounts edit, here is, click on add new account. My clunker is too slow. Let's see if I stop. Ooh. And run it again. My accounts edit file. Is not responsive. I don't know, maybe I should just restart this plunker. Okay, let me reload this plunker to see what happens. Reload. Yay. I've had this experience in the last half a year when during the thankful reload. And during thankful workshop, my computer just slowed to crawl. And I don't know what causes it. I realized that there was some kernel task that was amazingly slow. I have no idea how to fix it. Okay. If we try to run it. Hello. Okay. Let's see if we go to accounts. We should see the list of accounts. We click on add new. We see the form. Finally, it's coming back. So accounts edit page will have a form under the name of the after the header of accounts, and it has one row with account name and the input text type input, and then the second row with 2 buttons, save and cancel. Save will invoke accounts.save method, and cancel basically behaves the same as this link. It's a regular A link with the UIS ref that goes to the state accounts.list. The peculiarity here is that my input type text, this text, has ngModal attribute, and it tells Angular to use two-way binding. As soon as account variable inside my controller.ac object gets a name, this name will be displayed here. Or as soon as the user types here any name, this name will be transferred into this variable name on the accounts.ac.account. This is for two-way binding. Okay, so what else is configured in our app? We configure all the rest of the views. Accounts edit, accounts.edit looks pretty much the same as accounts new. They share the same template. The only difference is whether the text input is pre-populated or not. And then we have accounts.invoices that goes to a different view, which has the list of invoices.html. And the same is true about invoices edit, which is used for both new and existing invoices. Now, the last thing that we have here as configuration is configuring Restangular. We set the base URL here for Restangular. So every time we need to make a request to the server, we don't need to repeat the URL of this sandbox. If we look at the URL of the sandbox, here should be, this is the URL, http thankful.ppd1 getsandbox.com. Every time we need to hit any of these resources, we have to start with this URL and then append whatever is defined in the endpoint of the URL. So in my Restangular configuration, I'm setting the base URL with the sandbox, and then in each method, when I need to go to the server, I will just provide the endpoint, and Restangular will know to go to this particular sandbox. Okay. The first thing that we need to look at is how do we get list of accounts, and how do we get accounts controller to provide the data for us? Here is my accounts controller JavaScript file. And you can see that it is a pure JavaScript function, and it is attached as a controller to my module right here. We also have accounts controller $inject variable set with the dependencies. So my controller will have account server available for any services and $state to redirect to a different view. $state is coming from the UI router, and my account service is what I wrote in the file account serve. So what happens when this JavaScript file gets parsed and executed? The first thing this function defines is itself. It's called viewModal. Currently, this is the best practice for Angular.x1.x applications to use controllers through the controller as syntax, as we've seen in my template. We had accounts CTRL as accounts. This is controller as syntax. And inside the function of the controller definition, we use VM instead of this. So this is a view model that we attach the data and the methods to. The first thing that happens here is we define AC as context. And this is the container for all the data that we use inside our template. So you've seen that accounts.ac.accounts is the list of accounts. Accounts.ac.account singular is the current account. And basically what I like to do is I like my controllers to be very shallow. They have no logic, they have no server communications, they only provide the functions that the template can have references to, and it can provide the data that templates can display or populate. So I'm asking my service to give me the context with data, and then controller does not need to know anything else about that context. So what is happening here? My AC is defined inside the account service, and we'll see how it's defined. And then I have a function that says load accounts, and it's almost immediately executed here, almost, because I can use the same function later in my code. And inside this function, load accounts, I'm telling my service to load accounts. Now, when the service loads accounts, how will these accounts become available to my template? The trick here is that my template knows about the context. And it's the service responsibility to put the data, once it becomes available, on this context object, into that context object. And through the digest cycle, that's the term the Angular team uses, digest cycle, everything becomes available from each individual component or method or function or service through the templates. It will run digest cycle and resolve all the bindings that any of these components have. So once the accounts are loaded, this table will be populated with the actual rows. Why do I know that I have 3 rows? If I go to my sandbox and I look at my state, please show me the state. I have 3 accounts. Account 0, which has name test1, test2, and test3, which actually has 3 invoices. Okay. So I would expect 3 rows to appear here. Good. Now, when I click Add New Account, what should happen is the function Add New will be called, and the function Add New does what? It sets the current account on my context after getting the blank account from the service. The controller doesn't need to know how many properties the account has. It just tells the service, give me the blank account and make it the current account. And then we tell UI router to go to the new accounts.new state, and it does so. Since the blank account is not supposed to have a name, this name is not pre-populated. Okay. Now, what happens if we click on Edit? If we click on Edit, this function of my controller will be executed, vm.edit. What is it supposed to do? It should say set the current account as an account by ID. And again, I'm asking this service, find account by ID. If it finds account by ID, this account becomes the current account, and the current account name should be populated here in this box, and it does not. So something is not right, probably inside the service. We'll see why. And then it goes to the accounts edit, which shows me this view. So let's look at the service at this point before we dive into more functionality. Here is my account service. Again, it's a regular function which is attached to my module through a keyword factory as a service by the name account service, serve. This is the name which is used in dependency injection, and this is the name that lets the controller use this service. And what is happening inside my service? The first thing, I define the serve, basically this, account service variable, and it's an object which has a context, and the context will have an empty list of accounts initially. And when the controller asks this service GetContext, this service returns this object. Context, context, basically it's an object with the empty list of accounts, nothing else. Okay. When the controller asks the service GetBankAccount, it returns an object with empty ID, empty name, and empty list of invoices. If we need to add more properties, we'll add it right here. Okay, so that's why this name was empty when we tried to add a new account. Now, when we wanted to edit an account, the first thing we did, we asked the service to find my account by ID. Oops. It says to do, we need to implement that. Let's look at the load accounts method. So, what happens when the controller asks the service to load the accounts? Here is something that we need the Restangular for. We need to go to the server and load the list of accounts from the endpoint /accounts. So Restangular all means that we go to the endpoint base URL that's already configured, / here is the endpoint, and we'll get the list of objects from that endpoint. And this part will immediately return a promise. If you're familiar with the promises, you know that the promise can be resolved, and then when the promise is resolved, then the then attribute of that promise object will be invoked, and it will invoke that's the function, that will have an argument, which is also a function. It's like a callback function. So when the server returns the data, the promise will be resolved, and this function will be executed. The function takes the response from the server, and this response will be put in my context.accounts. So my service has the context with the list of accounts. After the server returns the data, this list of accounts will be populated with this data, and my controller, since it propagates this context to the template, populates the table. Now, when the controller asks the service find account by ID, we need to find the account by this ID. So we'll write var, this pointer is really slow, var, let's say filtered. The first thing we'll do, we'll find the list through filtering array of accounts, and my array of accounts is in the vserv dot context dot accounts, and then we'll filter this list using a function that takes a current account. I'll use abbreviations since my pointer is really slow now. And the function should return true if my current account ID is the same as the ID passed as an argument to this function. Now, once we have the filtered array, since the ID is supposed to be unique, I assume that there will be only one element in this filtered array, and if filtered oops, dot length is truthy. That means that the array is not empty. I will return filtered of 0, the first element from this array. Otherwise, I will return the blank account. Okay, let's see whether it works now. Here is the list of my accounts. If I try to edit it now, what is happening? Did I have a typo here? Filtered vserve context accounts filter function account return account ID is ID filtered length. Ooh, here we go. Filtered 0. That should work now. Sorry for the typo. Edit. Yes. Perfect. Okay, now it works since we found the account by ID. Okay, and hopefully we can edit this account. So instead of 1, we can say if it's test 11. Yeah, it works. Now, how does it work? Let's go back to the controller and see how it's supposed to work. When we click Save button, the save method on the controller is invoked. And what the controller will do, again, it tells the service, hey, service, save my current account. And after you are done, reload the accounts and go to the list page. Makes sense? Okay. When I save, it goes to the list page. After saving, how is the service implementing this functionality? The save method, save, gets an account as an argument, and it checks whether the account ID is empty or not. The account ID would be empty if I type here a name when I'm creating a new account. Test, let's say 22. When I type test 22, when I'm creating the new account, you remember getting blank account didn't give me an account ID, it was empty. So when I call this function save, when the account ID is empty, we will create a new account through Restangular all accounts. This will be an endpoint and posting an account object to this endpoint. Creation of new account. And how does it know that the name is test22? Because my current account has been updated through the two-way binding from my form. Now, when I edit, and for example, I'll take it back, then we come to the same function, service save. Account ID will not be an empty string. It will have actually a string value. And then we go to Restangular all URL accounts with account ID in the URL. And we'll post, and I'm telling that instead of put, I'm using a post for the simplicity here with the Restangular. It will go to the server and post to the accounts slash particular ID, probably 1 or 2, whatever it was there. Will go to the server and update the record in my in-memory block. What will happen next? We put into accounts controller, we refresh the list, we also call the load accounts function that we've already seen, and we redirect to the list. Here we go. Now, if we want to view invoices, what will happen is, let's see, invoices method is supposed to select an account first by ID and then redirect to list, but it doesn't have an account, so we already have this here. Let us set an account by ID first. Okay, and then it should go there. Let us see. Here is view invoices. It redirects to the list, but this one doesn't have any invoices. I believe test 3 had some invoices. Here we go. Yes, test 3 has invoices. Okay. And we have the invoices list. Again, the similar functionality, add new invoice, edit existing invoice, or remove an invoice should work here as well. One thing I forgot to do is I forgot to check whether we can remove an account. Here is remove account. We created a new account. Let's try to remove it. What will happen when we try to remove it? We gain a remove method on my account's controller. Actually, it's called delete. Why do I know that it's delete? Because in my template is in my list, my invoices, I'm sorry, remove calls the delete method with an account ID. So inside my account's controller, delete method will be called. And again, controller doesn't do anything except for calling the service and telling, hey, service, delete the account with this account ID. The parameter is passed through, and then reload the accounts. There is no need to redirect to a different view because we are already in the list view, so we look at the table. When the server refreshes the list, the table will be refreshed, and hopefully this test 22 account will be removed. If I click on remove, Plunker is slowing me down again, so let me try to stop the service and restart it. Run it again. Sorry. Let it run. I think we already looked through all the functionality that this controller provides. So my plunker needs to, there it is. Now it becomes responsive. Okay, the list has been updated. And we can also view invoices. We can add a new account. I think it will work again. Let me do test 55. Save it, edit it, make it, for example, capitalized. This works. Remove, we'll remove it. Okay, Plunker starts working. Cool. What else do we have in the account service? Update current account may be needed later when we update invoices, for example. Everything else has been already implemented here. Okay, now, when I click on invoices, say add new invoice, what should happen here? First of all, this view is supported by the invoices list. Invoices themselves are supported by invoices controller. Invoices controller as invoices. Again, it has two views, child views inside here. It has a table view and a form view. The table accounts invoice list gives me this table. On the top, I have the current account name, and then invoices word, and then I have add new invoice that, let me break it so that we can see it easier. Add new invoice will invoke the method add new on the invoices controller. Look at this. I can use both accounts controller here as a reference and invoices controller here as a reference. Why? Because my accounts controller is a parent controller. It's set on a div which has a child div with the invoices controller, ng controller invoices. Okay, that's very convenient so that we can use data from different levels of our application. Okay, again, we have ng repeat for each row in our invoices list. Oh no, it slows down again. Oh no. Oh. So on the invoices controller, we have methods edit, delete. We have on the accounts, for a current account, we have the list of invoices. So we have a mix of different controllers being used here, and the methods should be implemented on the invoices. Let's see what invoices controller does. Bunker, please give me invoices controller. Here we go. And you can see that everything here is to do. Please implement it yourself. So I hope that you can get this plunker that I shared in the message box in our workshop. You can fork it and you can finish this application implementing the methods on the invoices controller and on the invoices service. I can also give you another plunker where I've already done it. And this will be again, I'm passing this in the message box. And for the sake of the video, because I want to share this screen with you, here is another screen with the plunker with this name. If you're just viewing the video of this workshop, you can probably type this long string into the plunker edit to access the version with the implemented application, which is complete. Okay, so let me try to summarize what we've done and what we've learned. Number one is that when we start an application, we usually have the requirements for our functionality. We have the requirements for our UI. If we have the requirements for our UI, we start configuring our application. We first write an HTML page. We include all the Angular files. We include the files that we will develop. And we configure our application in our app.js. If we use a single page application with different views, we can use UI router. UI router is preferred version of the router in Angular 1.x, 1.3, 1.4, even 1.5. They backported the new router, ng router, from Angular 2 into Angular I believe later version of 1.4 or 1.5, but then that version has been already deprecated and replaced with the component router in Angular 2, which has been around probably for a month now. So I still believe that the UI router is the best router which is available for Angular.x 1.x applications. So we configure all the views. We configure Restangular to help us easier to talk to the backend service. Why do I use Restangular instead of just $HTTP? Again, it's a little bit easier, and you've seen the syntax, easy syntax to talk to the server in case you want to talk to RESTful API. And the next thing, we start to implement individual templates and individual components and individual services. And again, the focus here is that if you write the controllers, you try to make the controllers really shallow, not putting any of the logic inside the controllers. Why do I want to put the logic in the services? Because it's much easier to test the functions in the services than to test the controllers that depend on the scopes and the rest of the Angular guts. So here is also an example in this plunker of the test file for the account service. This test file uses basically Jasmine, and I usually run it with Karma. You can look up how to use Karma in the Angular documentation or Angular base website. So here you can see that I can test, say, that my service should load accounts from the server. And it should load data from the API through the HTTP backend mock. And I'm using mock data that I define right here. And I expect that after the backend was flashed, the account's name should be, the first account name will be A1 right here. And then, for example, find account by ID is the function. Find account by ID. And we test that it should find an account in the list. It should return empty account if it's not found, and so on. So this is just the regular way to unit test a function using Jasmine framework. And again, Karma is the great library that allows you to leverage Jasmine and to use tests for Angular. Okay, so hopefully you can learn something, or you have learned something from this workshop, and I appreciate your feedback. You can email me through my personal email, pavel@bosin.net, that I'm sharing in the message box. I usually respond to this email much faster than through the Thinkful account that I check only occasionally, or usually after the workshops when I have the students who are supposed to ask me questions. And I wish you best luck.